Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another Sunday Perspective show, and both Aaron and I were out at the KubeCon event this past week, and had a chance to sort of. It was good to be back live with the CNCF community, the open source community. You get a lot of things from what goes on in the media and what you can see on Twitter and other places where we all chat, Reddit and other places. But to kind of do it live and have some good conversations, just to kind of see things with your eyes, hear things from people, really, really good. And one of the things that was talked about a lot was sort of, okay, this is, KubeCon or Cloud Native Con, whatever you call it, is really sort of I'll call it sort of the open source AWS reInvent, if you will. So if you look at it from the breadth of technology that's there, it's really sort of everything that you kind of want from an open source perspective, at least some part up the stack. Maybe it doesn't necessarily get a whole lot into languages, but gets into a lot of the things that are infrastructure and cloud services and things around helping developers be successful, things around helping you manage costs and all sorts of stuff. But there really was a lot of discussion this week about kind of how much is too much, and how there was a lot of companies there was a lot of sponsors there was a lot of there's a lot of people there, practitioners and so forth, which is great. But it always sort of brings up, can you make money? Can you, does the industry do well when open source is the core of it? And, I got to think about that a lot, and I was thinking about it a lot because of an article that Stephen O'Grady wrote from RedMonk. He wrote it about a month ago. It didn't get a ton of coverage at the time, but anytime Stephen writes stuff, you kind of have to go and dig into it a little bit. Stephen is, one of the really, really, great thinkers in our industry, great writers in our industry. I've have tremendous respect for Stephen. He's written all sorts of books from, developers to the new kingmakers to the software paradox. He's really kind of covers, what the economics of software look like, where the influences in software look like. And he wrote an article again on the 23rd called Dead End. And it really was sort of talking about, what happens when you start mixing sort of commercial business models with open source licensing and has things change. So I thought what I would do is thinking back on sort of the KubeCon event and Stephen's really, really interesting article, sort of thought-provoking article, thought I would sort of dive into that, in the context of where we are today. So I'm going to do that after the break. Do you have petabytes of data that need to be stored safely, sustainably, and cost-effectively? Meet Fujifilm Tape. Yep, you heard that right. Tape. It's a solution that's become the backbone of many businesses' archive and data protection strategies. Tape allows you to store data with more longevity and efficiency than disk, and with much less expenditure over a 10-year period. Fujifilm has been pioneering innovation since 1934 and will continue to do so for many years to come. Learn more about how you can build your data storage strategy on tape with Fujifilm at builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. That's builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dig in a little bit into this article that Stephen O'Grady from RedMonk wrote called The Dead End. Really is focused on. Stephen he always does a very good job, and I've sort of adopted this model myself. It's really hard sometimes to just take any topic. People will say, "Hey, can you comment on something?" And if you listen to the show long enough, that I have a tendency to to sort of talk about historical context and how we got here. And maybe that's just because I'm old. And maybe it's because, we've seen a lot of things in technology that tend to repeat themselves. Sometimes we see really good things repeated. Sometimes we see, mistakes repeated. Sometimes we see people learn from mistakes and not make the same mistakes. And Stephen's one of those ones who, again, has been around the industry for a while and has sort of seen some things. So he always tries to put things in historical context and sort of talk about both how the technology evolved, what the kind of the influential things that moved, moved trends, moved behaviors, moved buying patterns. And so basically what he talks about is how, when computing got started, it was very much, it was around hardware-centric things, right? It was very IBM-centric. IBM essentially gave away the software for free as long as you were renting the hardware, kind of the mainframe model. And then, over time, open source kind of came along and said, hey, the underlying computing hardware is becoming commoditized. We had seen a shift from, things like the IBM mainframe to things like Oracle databases where you were paying for software, proprietary software, Microsoft Windows, whatever it was. And then, we saw open source come along and Linux first, and then lots of other projects after that. And he really kind of dives into the history of how that changed, and not only the economics of what people bought, but also, kind of where people perceived value in those things, right? And, open source is a really interesting concept, right? And I think we confuse sometimes open source as a technology and a development model and a community organizing model with kind of as an economic model, because we tend to go, oh, well, it's free. How do you make any money if it's free? All that sort of stuff. But then we see all these companies who go, hey, we're based on an open source project. And what's amazing to me is, even after all these years, even after, probably almost a decade now nearly a decade of open source being a really common thing to be used, it's a place where a lot of the innovation really comes out of. We still have people that sort of can't understand why, there are commercial entities that try and, profit from open source. And it's maybe because they wrote it, maybe because they have some expertise around it, maybe because they're very good at delivering it, whatever it might be. But there still seems to be always this confusion of like, well, if the software is free, why would you exist? Or why would I need you? And all that sort of stuff. So anyways, what Stephen really explores is he's very good at exploring this idea of, when, who should benefit from open source, right? And should it be entirely free, in which the people that spend their time and their effort doing it don't get any compensation? Should there be means of compensation for the people that put in their time and effort to either build it or support it, or create new capabilities around it, whatever? And then he kind of dives into the role in which venture capital plays a role in trying to accelerate some of these projects, whether it's funding startups or, we joked a lot at the CNCF event that, back in the day, we always talk about when venture capital first gave money to companies, they would sort of have to go and give it to, 4 or 5 companies. They'd have to give it to Cisco for networking and EMC for storage and Sun for hardware and maybe, or Intel or whoever, and Oracle for databases. Well, now, your money goes to one of the cloud providers. It goes to the CNCF to be able to, to go to all the events and all that sort of stuff. But it's sort of interesting, Stephen's sort of argument is what ends up happening is at some point, these open source projects will have, some number of commercial entities around some project. So let's take Kubernetes, for example, because it's a very well-known project. It's been a very successful project. We could use Linux as an example as well. But Kubernetes is probably more, top of mind for a lot of people. There's a lot of companies who, spun out of, the original Google project. They didn't spin out of the project, but, kind of came up because of that project. That project got a lot of traction as an open source project. Obviously, the entire CNCF exists because of Kubernetes. Events like KubeCon exist because of Kubernetes. And there was literally, I'll say, dozens of companies. Maybe there was, at this point, hundreds of companies, but dozens of companies who were just, delivering Kubernetes in some way, shape, or form. And what their value was could be debatable, whether or not they were just kind of packaging bits, whether they were adding a lot of stuff on top of it, whether they were delivering it as a service, whether they were running it for you, whatever it might have been. And part of Stephen's argument is, we get into these interesting situations in which, his argument is not that anybody should not be able to commercialize something. His argument is in when the companies doing it make changes to the licensing such that their users are restricted in some way, shape, or form from using it in kind of a traditional open source way. And I think it's a valid argument. I think there's always the argument of is the thing that I'm getting from you actually the open source project, or is it some variation of it? And by variation of it, what I mean is sometimes people will say, well, we have like a Kubernetes distribution, but in essence, it's a fork of the distribution. Maybe you've made some changes to it such that whoever is using it isn't actually using kind of the exact same bits. So, for example, if they didn't like you anymore and they didn't want to pay you anymore for it, would you be completely stuck with that software such that it's not like it's sort of Kubernetes, but it's not really Kubernetes, right? So that's one concern that people have is is it a fork? The second thing people are often concerned about is did you add a bunch of capabilities to this such that, if I use your thing and then eventually I don't like you or you go out of business or whatever, that I'm kind of stuck with these extra features. And this is more of an argument of, people ask vendors like, well, why did you do that? Oftentimes those added on things are, well, the project itself doesn't do certain stuff. We did it to make your life easier. We did it to make things more secure. There's more advanced security features or more advanced networking features or more advanced provisioning features, whatever those things might be. And those are really a decision that customers have to make as terms of, am I betting on the commercial entity that I'm working with? Do I really need those features? Do those features give me added benefit and all that sort of stuff? And I don't think Stephen's making an argument for either one of those things being a bad thing, right? His thing is, look, the market will decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And if you're really good at delivering something of value, again, whether it's feature capabilities or delivery lifecycle or you're managing the service for them, those are all things that you can try and compete on and differentiate yourself and try and be viable in the market for. And many companies figure out ways to do that. Now, in most instances, you're not going to have 10 companies be successful. You're probably going to have 2, maybe 3 in any given sort of bucket be successful, because the market just kind of can't typically sustain that many instances. The customers can't figure out how to sort through them. One of them tends to win a lot of deals or second place or whatever it is. His argument is really more about when companies start out with a very permissive open source license and then change their license. And I think it's an interesting place to be. He kind of frames it as it's being pushed by the venture capitalists as a way of kind of capturing customers in a way for some period of time so that they can monetize stuff. And I think it's an okay argument. I think it came up a number of times in the last couple of years. I think it's called like the SPSL. It's a license in which certain companies certain companies who are behind certain projects have been concerned that one of the cloud providers, i.e. an Amazon or somebody, is just going to take their project, but also take like their naming rights. This came up with Mongo. It's come up with a few projects, Elastic and others. And what they've done is they've said, okay, I'm going to change the license of my project such that the cloud providers can't just take sort of everything I've done, not only the software, which is oftentimes has permissible open source licensing, but also the project name, right? Which oftentimes is valuable. That trademark of that name is just as valuable as the thing, because it kind of conveys to people, hey, that's the thing you trust, the API that you write to, and it's an interesting situation because while a good chunk of the stack, typically the lower layers of the stack, people are perfectly happy to to have a choice between the open source, a managed service, commercial software. It seems to be problematic, maybe more higher level in the stack, sometimes in the data stack. But also if it's really just, kind of the company and the project protecting itself against service providers, it's a little different. And I guess this is where, this is where I sort of wonder, what alternatives there are. And this is an area where I guess the thing is, you not only have to be very good at software and put in sort of blood, sweat, and tears to build the software, build the community around it, but then you also have to be, really good at operating stuff. And so this is an interesting space, because I think we're seeing a lot of companies who, have grown up as software companies. A project has grown up as a software project, right? There's really no open source thing that originates as SaaS. And even though we're seeing, as Stephen has written really eloquently in the sort of software paradox, the value of software itself isn't necessarily great, but the capabilities of being able to run it or have somebody else run it have become more valuable. Operating software is more valuable than just the software itself, which obviously makes sense. But yeah, he brings up sort of an interesting paradox, and he sort of frames it as, once people start doing that, where they have a, sort of an open source project, and then at some point they change the licensing such that it restricts other things from happening, it's sort of a dead end, because you won't have venture capitalists invest in that anymore, or more so, he's not so worried about the venture capitalists, but he's worried about the projects itself. And I kind of think about that, and I'm like, it's fine to be concerned about that, but also I don't know what alternatives there are to that, because there is, if you're going to put in the effort to build the project, yes, somebody else could take it and be great at running it and all those sort of things, but allowing yourself to put certain protections in place, to kind of shape the market a little bit is not unusual. We do that in nearly every industry. And the people that sort of know the domain the best have done this for years and years and years. And so, yeah, I understand his argument of, this is a bad thing for the industry, but I feel like it's kind of a niche part of the industry. I don't see this happening in all sorts of places, right? I see the dynamics of it playing out much more in the context of, vendors can add features that they don't necessarily open source. Vendors can, put certain ways of packaging stuff together. Oh, it only is supported with, this stack, this sort of vertical stack. And customers have choice in those sort of things. And, the other part of it is, Amazon or whoever the cloud provider is, could continue to offer a service that is based on the open source, that if they're willing to, put in the effort to maintain it and whatever, they should be able to brand it with something that doesn't sort of steal the license and steal the trademark and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think I'm sure I'm missing something in terms of the really specifics of the license and so forth. But, given the nature of our industry, and given the nature of the ability to compete and build technology that runs in multiple clouds, and just sort of not have it, it's one thing to take the technology. I think we're all perfectly fine with that. People take it, they reuse it, they do new good things with it. And I shouldn't even say take it, right? They're just using it because it's permissive to use. But, to use somebody else's name and so forth is, it's sort of a gray area. And I'm sure within the licensing, it wasn't a gray area. And so you had to create some licensing. But, it does feel like, from the sake of, allowing those who have put in the work to make it what it is, to have the ability to profit off it, or at least, be compensated for their work in some way, shape, or form. It feels a little bit disingenuous to completely complain that they say, hey, look, I'm trying to, take some legal or business ways of protecting that, at least in a certain sense. And, if they make it such that nobody can use it, and they're sort of bait and switching it, yeah, they probably should be punished by the market, and the market tends to punish those things over time if it really is, deceptive to customers, if it creates a hardship for customers, right? If they're stealing from customers, or they're not delivering what they do. But I don't know that this concern about the license for some part of it against service providers is enough to sort of make a claim that it's sort of the dead end for open source. I think open source is still very robust. I'm sure venture capitalists who if I look at KubeCon, most of those companies, they've taken venture capital money. The reason they're able to exist is not because they were bootstrapping it out of their garage. It's because they were able to bring an idea to market at some point because of a venture capital. It's a part of the industry. You may not like it, you may despise it, but capital is a part of growing these ideas, whether they come from venture capital or banking, debt or whatever. So this of a lot of the things that have been written, and again, I don't ever like to criticize Stephen. I think he does a fantastic job. I just think, kind of painting this picture that sort of all of this space, sort of falls into this dead end because of, licensing for some small portion of it. I think you need to either be more specific about what it is, or, just because again, the industry looks to them, looks to RedMonk and others as, for a lot of guidance, and they do a great job with guidance. So I feel good about the open source industry. I feel like, licensing is, it's always going to be a part of it. But I don't feel like it's that restrictive. I think the market is figuring out, between VC and capital input and how communities are built and companies deciding, how they deliver things to market. If they decide to create a commercial entity for it, I think the market has, the customers have lots of flexibility. I mean, we saw this at KubeCon. There were 10 or 12 different optional ways of getting certain technologies as well as the open source projects. So, I feel like the market is not inhibited at any point, in any means. Now, the economy may become problematic and all those sort of things, but, I don't feel like this is enough to sort of paint a picture of, sort of the end of open source or a huge inhibitor to open source. I feel like it's still very robust and vibrant and so forth. So anyways, it's always great to sort of have lots of opinions about these things. I think sometimes when you make some of the arguments, it's good to have some details in there, as opposed to maybe just some broad generalities. I think that confuses people sometimes. But anyways, we're going to have a few more shows talking about KubeCon and sort of the industry as general. I think between KubeCon and AWS reInvent, even though they're at the end of the year, they're always really good barometers of, sort of lighthouses of where our industry is at any given point in time. And it allows people to have good conversations and figure out, where's it going next? Where is it going? Where's it going next? What things have influenced it? And so I think we're going to have a lot of really, really good conversations between now and the end of the year, between this show and reInvent and a few other things between then and now. So thank you all for listening. Another Sunday Perspective. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all safe. If you went to KubeCon, I hope you got home safe. And it was good to see a lot of people this week. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.